Suikoden IV is viewed by many fans as the red-headed stepchild of the series. It was the first game in the series after the departure of series creator Yoshitaka Murayama, which left many fans worried not just about the direction the series would be heading in, but also its potential quality. Fans, however, would soon be full of hope as it was revealed that Junko Kawano, the character designer from Suikoden 1, would be heavily involved with the creation of Suikoden 4, acting as the writer, producer, and character designer of the game. But fans would quickly realise that their hopes were misplaced, as the game was met with mediocre reviews from critics upon its release and was near universally panned by the fandom. Common complaints included bad story pacing, uninteresting characters, slow sea travel with outrageously high encounter rates, reduced party sizes, and how disconnected the game felt from previous entries by taking place in the distant past. Many fans blame Suikoden 4 as being the beginning of the end for the series 20 years ago, as the poor reception from fans and the mediocre reviews from critics would result in the game selling much less than that of Suikoden 3, despite the fact that Suikoden 3 released only in Japan and North America, while Suikoden 4 released worldwide. The disappointment of those who bought and played Suikoden 4 would cause many people to lose interest in the series, which led to even less people buying Suikoden 5, and those declining sales effectively ended the franchise. So I want to go over all of the major complaints that fans had about the game, as I've recently started wondering, did the game truly deserve the hate that it received, or did we over-exaggerate our complaints in our disappointment? One of the biggest complaints that people have about the game is its terrible pacing. That the story felt too short and too rushed, that nothing was fleshed out, and how we bolted through the game's story points from point A to B to C at lightning speed. Part of the reason for those complaints about the game's poor pacing is that many people mistakenly believe that the war in Suikoden 4 started in the solar year 302, and that it lasted over 5 years until it ended in the year 307. The complaint being, how could a 5+ year war happen so quickly? Well, because it wasn't a 5-year war. This misunderstanding, or the fans' misinterpretation of the timeline, came from information in the Marugoto Suikoden book that states, Solar Year 302, conflict breaks out in the island nations over the Rune of Punishment, one of the 27 true runes. People misinterpreted this as the events of Suikoden 4, but the conflict that broke out in 302 over the Rune of Punishment is actually referring to the events of the pirate Steel dominating the seas while he bore the rune, as well as covering his battles with Edgar, Kika, and Brando. Steel would be killed during one of these battles, and the Rune of Punishment would pass to Brando, and then Brando would rule the seas for the next few years. And around the time all of this was taking place, Graham Cray would set up the Cray Trading Company and align himself with Kuluk, where he would plot in the background to instigate the Island Liberation War. But the Island Liberation War, the events of Suikoden 4 itself, didn't actually begin until the solar year 306. So this narrows it down from 5 years to 1 year. The war may even have been less than a year. The exact length of the war is never stated, only the years it began and ended. It could have begun in late 306 and ended in early to mid 307. It might have been a 3-month war, a 6-month war, a year-long war. We don't know. So what many people thought was a 5-year war was actually 1 year or less. I'm not saying this erases Suikoden 4's pacing problems, but maybe knowing that the war was significantly shorter than you previously believed might help you look at your complaints a little differently and help you hate the game just a little bit less. People also, in their dislike of the game as a whole, tend to overlook the fact that Suikoden 4 actually has a very strong beginning, as Laszlo, the main character, has completed his training and is ready to become a full-fledged Knight of Gaian. Disaster soon strikes as pirates attack, and the Rune of Punishment leaves devastation in its wake. The rune then passes to the commander of the Knights of Gaian before taking his life shortly after, and then passing to Laszlo, who is then betrayed by his jealous best friend, who falsely accuses him of his commander's murder, which results in Laszlo's exile from Razril. Laszlo would then wind up in the Kingdom of Obel, and a short time later, the Kuluk Empire launches an invasion of the island nations. That is an excellent beginning to the story. We learned about the Gaian and Kuluk War, which gave us the backstory we needed for the game's setting. We learned about Laszlo's past and what kind of person he is. We learned about the Rune of Punishment's parasitic nature, how powerful it is, and that it retains the memories and souls of its past bearers, which allowed us to understand the motivation of the main villain. That first third of Suikoden IV is right up there with the rest of the series in terms of quality, and anybody who tries to deny that Suikoden IV had a great beginning is blinded by their hatred of the game as a whole. Sadly, the game completely falls apart once Kuluk begin their invasion of the island nations. The Kuluk invasion is where you'd expect the story to ramp up, but unfortunately Suikoden IV went in the opposite direction, and this is where the quality of the game nosedived. It's like that meme of the unfinished horse drawing where the quality starts amazing and then quickly turns into a childish doodle. You go from a wonderful fleshed out opening packed with lore and a nice steady pace to now leaping from story beat to story beat in rapid succession. In every other game in the series, those story beats are broken up. It's story beat, travel through a forest, story beat, pass through a mountain, story beat, explore a dungeon. Each story beat is followed up by a dungeon-like experience as you advance to the next story event, and that brings a nice steady pace to the game. It builds tension and gives the player some engagement as they travel to the next story event. It gives you the chance to explore the world around you while you process what just happened in the story and wonder what will happen next. But in Suikoden IV, it's story beat, story beat, story beat, story beat. You know, there are no forests, mountains, caves, dungeons, ruins, or castles of any kind for you to explore between story events to break up the flow and let you catch your breath. The game doesn't give itself the chance to build any tension. It's made worse by the fact that the overworld is empty and lifeless. All you can do between story events is sail across a vast, empty ocean at a snail's pace while being frustrated by the most disgusting encounter rate you'll ever witness, which drags you into a random battle every 5 seconds. It's the emptiness of the world and the lack of dungeons between story beats that makes the game feel shorter than it is, and that leads to the player becoming incredibly bored. To the people who complain about Suikoden IV being too short, the game wouldn't be magically better by being longer. Sure, I would have loved another 5 to 10 hours, but the game's pacing issues wouldn't be solved by dragging the game out. If you didn't enjoy spending 20 hours zipping from story beat to story beat with slow ship travel and disgusting encounter rates, what makes you think that doing that exact same thing for another 10 hours would solve the problem? Suikoden IV doesn't suffer from a length issue, it suffers from an emptiness issue. The ocean is too big and empty. There weren't enough islands and there were no dungeons. It's that emptiness that creates the pacing issue, and they tried to mask that emptiness by distracting you with high encounter rates. There are so many questions we can ask. Why is there so much unused and empty space in the center of the map? The amount of unused ocean space in the center of the map is equal to the amount of space used on both the left and right sides of the map combined. The map is unnecessarily large and empty. There weren't enough islands, and the islands that were there were woefully underutilized as we were restricted only to the towns. Why couldn't we explore the islands? On Nanal Island, when the village chief orders us to steal the elven remedy, we take a 5-second back road beside his house, and then suddenly we're inside the great elven tree in the exact room where the remedy is being kept in. Why wasn't there a forest to travel through between the human and elf settlements on Nanal to help with the flow of that story portion? Why were the iron mines of Razrol not used? They could have been used similar to how the Tinto mines were used in Suikoden II, to sneak into the city. Then we could have rallied the Gaia Knights to our aid before the upcoming battle to liberate it. The game just has so much unutilized potential. I fully agree with everybody that the game suffered from bad pacing, but the pacing problem is created by the emptiness of the world. It's the padding with slow, tedious travelling on the empty overworld with an insultingly high encounter rate to cover the fact that they made zero effort to fill out the world with dungeons, caves, forests, mountains, and ruins to explore. And that emptiness is the real problem. As for the other complaints people have about the game, let's start with how disconnected it is. Set in the island nations 150 years in the past, long before the events of the first game, Suikoden IV was far removed from its predecessors. This made it difficult for many fans to get invested in the story as it deprived fans of one of the charms of the series, recurring characters. All of the characters we knew and loved from previous entries were nowhere to be found. In Suikoden 2, between playable and non-playable characters, there were over 40 characters that returned from the first game and made an appearance. Characters that fans had formed attachments to returned, and that allowed fans to form an even bigger bond with them. We got to see how they grew, we saw them mature, and we saw the changes and the impact that they had on the world. And then in Suikoden 3, we had 12 recurring characters from previous games. A further 8 characters were either relatives of or had connections to characters who appeared in the previous games. And there were also a few who were retroactively added by being given backstories that made them appear in previous games. What recurring characters did we have in Suikoden 4? Vicky, Jean and Ted. What relatives did we have? We had Eleanor Silverberg. And if you really want to stretch it, we had Gary. But it wasn't just the recurring characters that we loved. It was how connected the games felt. The nation that Suikoden 1 takes place in borders the nation which Suikoden 2 takes place in, and Suikoden 3 takes place in nations that border that of Suikoden 2. The fact that the games took place in neighbouring nations so close together in the timeline made everything feel connected, which allowed fans to form bonds and attachments, and that helped us get absorbed into the world and invested in the lore. We got to see the characters we loved return, we got to see their children grow up, and we got to see how the world had changed in the last few years thanks to our actions. Suikoden 4 took that away from us by taking place 150 years before the first game. It's so far removed from everything else that happens in the series. Every character we know and love hasn't been born yet, and by the events of every other game, everyone in Suikoden 4 is long dead. That makes it really hard to care. Two other big complaints people have about the game is how boring and uninteresting the characters are and the reduced party size from 6 to 4. Suikoden has always prided itself on its large cast of characters and 6-person parties, but how many of those 108 characters are actually playable? All previous entries in the series featured between 70 to 80 playable characters, while Suikoden 4 featured only 52 playable characters. That's much lower than every other game in the series, but having 52 characters to choose from is still more than enough to form a 6-person party. That reduction in party size removed the charm of Suikoden's battle system. 3 characters in the front row and 3 characters in the back row. You had short-ranged attackers that could only attack from the front row and could only hit enemies in the front row. You had medium-ranged attackers that could attack from the front or back row but could only hit enemies in the front row. And then you had long-ranged attackers who could hit enemies in any row. This allowed you a lot of flexibility with your party setup. You could go with the classic warriors and tanks in the front row, protecting the archers and mages in the back row formation. Or you could fill your back row with 3 medium melee focused characters and go all out on brute force. You couldn't do that in Suikoden 4 because your party was lined up in a straight line. This made it difficult to protect your squishy mages and archers because everyone was on the front line and everyone was an equal target. Even to this day, I still don't like the 4-person party. The reduced party size and the flat 4-in-a-line formation combined with the ridiculous encounter rate often made me resent the combat system. It was a terrible decision and it hurt the enjoyment of the battles in the game, which hurts the overall enjoyment of the game. As for the complaints people have about the characters being boring and uninteresting, I remember hating the vast majority of the cast in this game. The reduced party size didn't leave you with any wiggle room for experimenting with new characters, and because of that I'd end up judging the characters based on their appearance and their design. And I'd only use the characters I thought were visually appealing, which there isn't that many of. And I know many of you do the same because people regularly complain about how ugly the characters are. It wasn't until my later playthroughs that I started rotating the characters whose appearances I hated into my party, but it was almost begrudgingly rotating them in just to try and shake things up. And even until this year, I still had this negative opinion on the characters that I hated them because I hated their design. It wasn't until I started recording my Suikoden 4 character ranking video earlier this year and actually sat back and thought about each character that I realised, yeah, their designs do suck, but in terms of writing and combat ability, they're not that bad, and I realised I liked many of them a lot more than I thought I did. Don't get me wrong, Suikoden 4 does have the weakest cast in the series, but I think the cast gets unfairly crapped on by the fandom because of their uninteresting and ugly designs, and that dislike of their designs makes people think the characters themselves suck. Suikoden IV may be a bad Suikoden game when it's compared to the high quality of the other entries, but a bad Suikoden game is still a decent RPG. While many of our criticisms and complaints about the game are fair, I think we over-exaggerated just how bad the game was in our disappointment of it. Fans became so spoiled by the high quality of the first 3 games that when a mediocre entry came along, we all acted like it was the worst thing in the world. I think this is particularly true for those of us outside of North America. Remember, Suikoden 3 only released in Japan and North America, so you American fans saw steady releases every 2 to 3 years, while those of us in Europe and the rest of the world had a 5-year long wait between Suikoden 2 and 4. And those 5 agonising years we spent waiting to get our hands on the next entry made the pill of disappointment all the more difficult to swallow. I do think some of the negativity surrounding the game came from knee-jerk overreactions because it didn't have the same quality as 1, 2 and 3. Some of the negativity came from people misunderstanding the timeline and mistakenly believing that the war lasted 5 years instead of being under a year. Much of the dislike for a large portion of the characters comes from their ugly designs rather than having anything to do with their writing or combat abilities. But there are of course many valid criticisms like the bad pacing, the emptiness of the world, the lack of dungeons, the reduced party size and the high encounter rate. Suikoden 4 is a game that's plagued with poor design choices, there's no disputing that, but we also shouldn't overlook the good about it. It's got a beautiful soundtrack, the lore behind the Rune of Punishment and the story surrounding it is fascinating, and so is the lore of the rune cannons. The first third of the game is fantastic and it's right up there with the rest of the series in terms of quality. And most importantly, let's not forget about Reevaluating, the greatest minigame in the series. Let me know what your thoughts are about Suikoden 4. Did you hate the game? Did you love the game? Do you dislike it but think the hate is excessive? What didn't you like about the game? Or what do you wish they had done differently? Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.